everyone. Can you hear me in back? Great. Okay, so thank you very much for being here. Before I get started telling you about my research, I just wanted to thank Eiler and the LGBT community here for inviting me and making me a part of this really exciting movement. It's really been an honor for me to be here these last few weeks, so thank you. So today I'm going to talk to you about my research on Faroese attitudes about the LGBT community and the impacts of the legalization of gay marriage or gay civil unions in other parts of Scandinavia. So Nordic Perspectives, attitudes about and impacts of gay marriage in Nordic societies. So first I'll tell you a bit about my research on Faroese attitudes about LGBT individuals and rights. And then I'll tell you about the impacts of same-sex unions where they've been legalized. So why is this an important topic? Well, we have data on this topic from other areas in Northern Europe, but we should expect the Faroe Islands to be different, and we really have very limited data about this topic in the Faroe Islands. One thing that makes it particularly difficult to gauge public opinion is that there's reason to believe that attitudes about LGBT rights are changing in the Faroe Islands, but there are conflicting voices. So for instance, our Pride parade last week was very successful, more successful than in years past. This suggests that attitudes are changing. However, there's also been something of a backlash to that, suggesting that there are still people who are opposing equal rights for the LGBT community. So what we need is a formalized study to understand really how the general public feels about these issues. So in order to get at those issues, I compiled a questionnaire where I was asking where I had a series of statements, and I asked participants to rate how much they agreed with these statements on a scale of 1 to 5. So I considered how the Faroese feel about LGBT individuals. So for instance, one statement was, I believe that homosexuality is unnatural, impure, and ungodly. So that's one statement, and then participants had to rate whether they, 1, strongly agreed with this, 5, strongly disagreed with this, or someplace in between. I also asked about LGBT rights. So 1, should gay marriage or civil unions be legalized in the Faroe Islands? 2, the argument that gay marriage may damage societies by undermining the meaning of heterosexual marriage, a concern of some, and whether LGBT individuals should be allowed to adopt as easily as heterosexual couples. Finally, I also asked a series of demographic questions to understand what other variables might be related to these attitudes. So for instance, I looked at age, education, and the extent to which a person was religious to see if that was related to these general attitudes. So I had 205 participants total. I trapped some of those poor people on the Sandoy ferry, and the rest I got online. We have about an even sex ratio in this sample, and an average age of 33 years, with a very broad age range. That was important to me, worked hard to get that, so a range of 18 to 80 years. So now to start with the results. First, there's this statement that homosexuality is unnatural, impure, and ungodly. So I'll explain to you first what you're looking at here. What we've got here is frequency. I know that it's hard for you guys to read the numbers in back, but basically this is just the number of individuals who agreed with various statements. So here we've got strongly agree, agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree, or strongly disagree. So basically for the next few slides it'll all be going from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And what you're seeing here is when we look at this whole, we've got 65% of people either disagreeing or strongly disagreeing with this statement that homosexuality is unnatural. And then if we take out this neither category, so the people who basically said they don't have an opinion on this issue, when we take that out, we see that a full 75% of people disagree with this statement. So this is important because this is one of the primary arguments that people who are opposed to equal rights for LGBT individuals use. They say that homosexuality is unnatural and ungodly. And so it's important that we have documentation showing that that may not be representative of larger viewpoints. Now when it comes to gay marriage and civil unions, here we're seeing almost 50% of people agreeing or strongly agreeing that gay marriage should be legalized in the Faroe Islands. And again, if we take out this sort of undecided factor, then we've got 66% of people supporting that statement. So that actually, that 66% puts the Faroe Islands in a similar range to other Northern European countries where similar questions have been asked. So in most Northern European countries, if you ask, should gay marriage be legalized throughout Europe, we're getting between 60 and 70% of people saying yes. So this makes the Faroes quite similar to those societies. Okay, the concept that gay marriage damages society, here we've got over 50% of people disagreeing with that statement, and of those who stated an opinion, we've got 67% disagreeing. Finally, when it comes to the question of adoption, this is the one where we're seeing a bit more variation. So here we've got 34% of people agreeing that they should be able to adopt as easily, or if we're considering people who are stating their opinion, then that goes up to 40%. But it's interesting to note that there's sort of a wider distribution here of attitudes, less starkly defined as in the other variables. Okay, so in the case of all of these, we're seeing some variation. So it's not that we've got 100% agreement even when we're seeing stark patterns. So what's driving the variation within this sample? So the variables I considered to assess that are age, religiosity, education, so lots of demographics. And somewhat surprisingly, neither age nor education showed any correlations. So this is interesting because it's saying if you're, say, 66 or 70 years old, there's still an equal likelihood that you're going to be in favor of gay rights as if we were testing, say, a 19-year-old. Likewise, a 19-year-old might be equally likely to be opposed. However, when we look at religiosity, there we're seeing a correlation. So I asked a few questions to gauge people's levels of religiosity. And they yielded similar results, so I'm just going to describe one to you. So I asked, how frequently do you attend religious services? And people who attended religious services frequently also tended to be opposed to gay marriage and civil unions, believe that gay marriage damages society, be opposed to LGBT adoption, and to believe that homosexuality is unnatural, impure, and ungodly. So here, I think it's really important that we pause and think a bit about what correlations mean. So when we're seeing a correlation, that means that somebody who rates themselves as being, a highly religious person, then there's an increased likelihood that they'll also, say, be opposed to LGBT adoption. However, that's not to say that all religious individuals believe this. There's variation within every group. Moreover, that's not to say that religion itself is what's driving this trend. So they're correlated, but that doesn't mean that there's a causal arrow there. So it could be that people who are highly religious maybe live in smaller communities, and so they have less exposure to diversity. Or it could be people who are frequently attending church are just generally politically more conservative, and this sort of goes along with the suite of viewpoints there. So we don't want to make assumptions about what's driving this, but rather it's important to recognize this correlation. Then I also asked about how comfortable individuals were around LGBT individuals. And what we find here is that people who claim that they don't feel comfortable around LGBT individuals also are more likely to be opposed to gay marriage and civil unions, to argue that gay marriage damages societies, be opposed to adoption, and to view homosexuality as unnatural. So none of this is surprising. But there is one more variable that I looked at that actually is a bit less intuitive. And so what we're thinking about here is the concept of cultural threat. So it's argued that people consider themselves as belonging to an in-group and an out-group. And that if you feel that your cultural identity is threatened, that individuals who don't belong to your group may be particularly frightening or cause particular discomfort. And so what I asked here was, I had a statement saying, I'm afraid that with globalization, Faroese culture and language will be lost forever. And I asked how much people agreed with that statement to get a sense of cultural threat. And indeed, there was a correlation there, in that people who felt that Faroese culture was threatened were also more likely to perceive homosexuality as unnatural. They were more likely to perceive homosexuality as damaging, or gay marriage as damaging society. And they were also more likely to be opposed to legalization of gay marriage and civil unions. Okay, so a summary of these results is, as a whole, it looks like Faroese people are generally open to gay rights, equal rights for LGBT individuals, although there is absolutely variation within the population. There was more limited support for adoption rights as opposed to other LGBT rights. And the variation that we observe in the population is correlated with religiosity, comfort levels, and cultural identity. Okay, so now we've done a lot of thinking about Faroese attitudes, but that brings us to the more practical issue of equal rights for LGBT individuals. So how are these attitudes relevant to the gay rights movement? Well, we have a sense that the Faroese community may be open to much of the equality that the movement is working towards, but those who are opposed to equal rights have voiced some serious concerns. In particular, one of the main objections to legalization of same-sex marriage is that it's feared to undermine the institution of heterosexual marriage. So a quote from an American conservative to that extent is, "We are witnessing no less than the end of marriage itself in Scandinavia." So that recognition of gay civil unions is really bringing about some sort of marriage apocalypse. Okay, so the specific concerns of these individuals is that one, where we have legalized gay marriage, civil unions, or registered partnerships, we've also seen decreasing marriage rates, increasing divorce rates, and increasing non-marital births. So the question is, do same-sex unions really contribute to these trends? And the way that we can address that is by looking at the data from these societies where we've had gay civil unions recognized for several years. So, okay, I know this graph is going to be really hard for a lot of you to read, so I'm just going to talk you through it slowly. So what we're looking at here is marriages per 1,000 inhabitants. So you can just think of that as the number of marriages in a society. And we've got a lot of different countries represented here.
Right. There's a laser on there.
Oh, that's okay. So this top line is the United States, so just ignore that, because you can see it looks totally different, and we're thinking about Nordic attitudes now. But let's think about these here. And down here we're looking at years from 1960 to 2004. So the question is, how have marriage rates changed over these last several decades? And what you can see is for these Scandinavian and other Northern European countries, we're seeing a pretty steady decrease that starts really most dramatically in the 70s, but then starts to plateau in the late 70s. So we see recognition of gay civil unions, same-sex civil unions, actually starting in Denmark in 1989, and then a few other nations follow. So at that time, we're already seeing basically a plateau of this decrease in marriage. So we have several decades of marriage declining, marriage rates declining, then we have a plateau, then we have the legalization of civil unions and registered partnerships. So that, in fact, since registered partnerships have been legal, there hasn't been any decline, and in some societies we've actually seen an increase in marriage rates. I should mention, this isn't my research. This is taken from Professor Badgett at the University of Massachusetts. So the rates are very similar in the Faroe Islands in the last couple of decades, or the last really 12 years, are very similar to what we're seeing in these Scandinavian societies now. So what that's saying is, although these other Scandinavian societies have recognized partnerships or gay marriage, they're having the same rates of marriage that the Faroe Islands is having without recognizing partnerships and without legalizing marriage. We see similar data with divorce. So here, these are divorce rates. Again, ignore the US on the top there. Here we're seeing a pretty steady increase in divorce rates until the mid-80s, and then we're seeing a plateau in all of these countries starting at about 85. So full 4 years before we start to see registered partnerships being recognized. So again, there is in fact an increase in divorce rates in the last several decades, but it doesn't appear to be related to legalization. We see a similar trend in the Faroe Islands right now, where in fact at about 2005 we started to see a big jump in divorce rates in the absence of the legalization of gay marriage. And finally, there's the case of non-marital births. As you can see, we have less data on that, but this is the number of children being born to parents who are not married. And we're looking at Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands. And what you can see is that number starts to increase in the early 80s, again, well before the legalization of partnerships. And that number seems to still be increasing up until the mid-90s, where it seems to plateau in a couple of countries. So you could say, well, it continued to increase after the legalization, so maybe that's really a problem. Well, let's look at where these numbers end. It looks like about 50% of kids are being born in Denmark and Norway to unwed parents. And that actually is very similar to the number of kids being born out of wedlock here in the Faroe Islands for the last 10 years. And so again, we've got really stark evidence that these trends that are being observed are in no way related to the legalization of same-sex unions. So the implications here is the recognition of same-sex unions does not appear to have any negative impact on larger marital and family institutions. And the Faroe Islands already show similar trends in marital and family patterns without legalization. So the conclusions are, as far as Faroese attitudes are concerned, there's diversity within the Faroese population, but much of the population is open to gay rights. And as far as the impacts of gay marriage, the changes in marriage patterns existed before the recognition of same-sex unions, and there's no evidence that the legal recognition of same-sex unions has contributed to these patterns. And thank you to many wonderful people who helped me get this data.